What's up, guys? In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to take your Fortigate device straight out of the box and get it up and running in a fairly simple business environment with multiple internet connections and a couple of different VLANs, right? So this tutorial is not going to be for everybody, but I think it's a good starting point for somebody who's trying to deploy this firewall in an environment that has that is not just a flat network, right? So once you get your device out the box and powered on, you're going to plug into whatever management port is used for that model. So I'm using a Fortigate 60F. On the Fortigate 60F, you plug into port 1 because there is no dedicated management port. So I'm going to be plugging into this guy for this tutorial. On the larger models, like the 101F, you can see that there is a dedicated management port. So you would be plugging into that if your specific model has that management port. So once you plug your laptop or your PC into port 1 or the dedicated management port, in your browser, you're going to go to 192.168.1.99. And so once you arrive at this page, you should see this screen right here, basically asking you to proceed with caution because the certificate is not trusted. If you don't see this screen, you might need to add the S at the end of HTTP. Sometimes when you type in just the IP address in your browser bar, it's not going to load. The HTTP service is by default turned off on some of the later models. So you're not going to get a page that loads. You're going to get something that looks like this. So in the event that this isn't working for you, go ahead and make sure you add that S in there. You're going to click on Advanced and Proceed. And then you're going to type in basically the default credentials for Fortigate, which are admin and then no password. So once you do that, it's going to ask you to set up a new password. So we're going to go ahead and set that up now. Okay. Once you do that, it's going to ask you to log in with the new credentials. And we'll just click begin here. And I think the first tab here is related to Forta converter, migrating a config. We're not going to do that. I'm just going to click later. The second screen, and this is kind of on newer Fortigate firmware, is asking you to enable or disable automatic patching. I always disable it. I would recommend that you do the same and patch your devices on your own schedule after you've vetted the firmware based on security vulnerabilities and feature sets, right? So click disable if you want. If you don't, and you just want to have your stuff automatically patched a couple days after the firmware's release, go ahead and select this. I would advise against that though. Save and continue, and I'll click acknowledge. And then for the dashboard type, optimal is just going to give you kind of like the basic level dashboard monitors and widgets. Comprehensive is going to give you like, I think, all of them that are available. And it's just, personally, I like to select optimal and then add the ones that I use and the ones that I like. But if you want just all of them added out of the box, go ahead and select comprehensive there. All right, I always turn this video thing off. I say do not show again because if I upgrade devices like late at night or something like that and I sign back into the device, it'll show you the video for the newest version and usually kind of scares me if the volume's up. So I just go ahead and click don't show again. And so now we're pretty much we're in our device. The basic level things have been done, and we just need to kind of start configuring, right? So the first thing that I do is I go over here to System, and then I click on Settings. And then I name my device. So in this case, I'm just going to call this FG Lab 1. Actually, I'm going to call it P. Whenever I'm naming like primary, secondary devices, I typically will name the first one P for primary and then the second one S for secondary. So that's just kind of my naming convention. I'm not in Pacific time. I'm in Central. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change that so that my log messages have the correct timestamps. Let's see, I'm going to let the NTP, I'm going to listen on this. This is required for FortiLink. You can change the HTTPS port that the Fortigate is listening on for admin sessions. So A little security through obscurity. I'm just going to leave it at 443 for now, but if you wanted to change your admin port, you could do that here. Idle timeout, for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to go ahead and just extend this to 20 minutes. 5 minutes is low, but I'm going to go ahead and extend this to 20 minutes just because 5 minutes, if you're in and out of something, doing other things, you'll just continually get logged out. It's kind of a pain. And then here is something else that I would recommend doing. I'm not going to do it for this tutorial because it's going to extend the time. But the password basically requirements for creating admin users, how many, special characters and numbers, I would probably kind of jump this up from 12 to something like maybe like 20 or 30, and then make some more requirements here to kind of make it more strict if you're going to have a lot of local admins. If you're not going to have a lot of local admins, it's not a huge deal, but I would make a change there if you want. At this point, you could also kind of change the color or the language of the admin GUI. I kind of like the Jade, the default color scheme, so I'm going to leave that way it is. And that's kind of it. One thing that I kind of would recommend is enabling this right here. Basically, if your FortiGate is powered off without being shut down, it's going to basically throw an error when you go to log back in, saying that it needs to check the disk. If you tick this box, it just checks the disk when it comes back up anyway and stops you from having to essentially reboot and check the disk at a later time. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and click that there, and then I'm going to click apply. So after you click apply, eventually your host name should pop up here. And at this point, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to start creating my VLANs for my network that I want to deploy. So I'm going to go to network, and then I'm going to go to interfaces. And here in this tutorial, I'm going to go over adding VLANs to a FortiLink interface, which is only used if you're using a FortiSwitch. In my environment, we are going to be using a FortiSwitch, so those VLANs need to be associated with a FortiLink interface. However, if you were using a Cisco switch or anything like that, you could take another interface. So from our ports that we have available, let's say I'll just pull out 4 and 5. Right, and then you could add VLANs to these individual ports, or if you're just doing a flat network, you could put a network on this port and connect your switch to that. If you wanted to do an aggregate to a non-Forti switch, you would just create a new aggregate link, right? And then from there, you could assign ports to it. So I'm not going to go over that today, but I'll show you basically, and creating VLANs is going to be the same on any of these ports as it is the FortiLink port. You would just select whatever port when you go to create your VLAN. So I'm going to create a couple different ports here, and then I'm going to kind of fast forward through some. I'm basically going to create just a regular business environment, how I would do like a small business or a medium business that doesn't have a whole lot of complexity. So I'm going to go to create new, and I'm going to go to interface. I always name it the VLAN number because you cannot change the name. So I'm going to go ahead and just do VLAN 10, and I'm going to call this LAN. This is going to be basically my hardwired devices. Anything that's plugged into my switch on my network is going to be on this VLAN 10. And then for this, I typically use the second octet for the site. So in this case, I'll just do 1, and then the next one for the VLAN. So we're going to just do ping on this. We're going to enable DHCP. For these settings right here, for the DNS server, if you leave this the same as system DNS, it's going to use the FortiGuard servers, which kind of go down frequently. So I go ahead and add my own. This is assigned in Google and Quad 1 as DNS servers. Now, if you're using domain controllers internally, you would put those domain controllers here if you're resolving DNS on your domain controllers. And then the lease time is a little long. It's 7 days by default. So I jumped that down to 1 day. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And this is going to finish creating that VLAN. Right. So that's going to be my LAN network. And then the other type of, I'm going to create a couple other networks. The next one's going to be a guest network, right? For BYOD devices. And we're going to set that one up a little bit differently. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to call that VLAN. Let's call this VLAN 100. And I'm going to call this guest. And it's a VLAN. And we're going to put it on our FortiLink interface. Do that. And 10.100. All right. And now we're actually going to leave that off. All right, we're going to enable DHCP, and then also I don't want my guest to have a weak lease, so I'm going to cut that down to 86400. One of the other things that I'm going to allow on this is block intra VLAN traffic, because on my guest network, my guests shouldn't be able to communicate with other devices on that network. This is strictly just internet. So I'm going to go ahead and put that on. So now we have our guests. The other network that I'm going to create is like a DMZ type network, where this is going to be equipment maybe from a vendor, or basically devices that are on my network plugged in that I don't want to be able to access my other devices plugged in. So I'm just going to give this like a general DMZ name here. So I'm going to call this, let's go 20, and then I'm going to call this DMZ. Put it on FortiLink. And we're going to do 10, 21, 24. And I'll turn ping on, and then I'll enable DHCP. Same kind of thing here. And I'll leave all that the same, right? And then these are kind of like the baseline. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a couple more, and kind of fast forward through those, or cut it here. They're basically all going to have like the same kind of setup as this LAN VLAN, but just some additional VLANs. So I'll catch you on the next screen after I create those. Okay, so I've taken basically the LAN network, and then I've created a couple of additional network for servers, for phones, for private Wi-Fi, and for cameras. And I've also, basically created all that in here. And so at this point, we have a lot of different networks. This should be kind of comparable to what you'll see in some of these medium to small business environments. If you don't use all these, like I said, all these will be a part of a script that I supply you to be able to use to kind of push this out, without having to manually do all of this. Even if you don't use them, you don't have to. They're there if first, at some point, a customer decides that they do want to deploy cameras or a server. This is here, right? So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create our zones. And so I always use zones when I configure FortiGate device, because it's so much easier. It's not it cuts down on the amount of firewall policies you have to create. It also is very helpful if you have to change an interface or delete an interface and re-add it, or make, anytime you have to remove references for an interface, it's much easier to just pull it out of the zone and do what you need to do with it, versus having to remove every individual reference to an interface on the firewall before making a change. So I'm just going to create two zones, a couple zones here. Let's see, we'll create a LAN zone, create new zone. And we're just going to call this LAN. This is going to be kind of our private network. So we're going to put LAN in there. We're going to put our private Wi-Fi in there. We're going to put our servers in there. And again, we want to make sure that block intrazone traffic is ticked off so that those networks can communicate. You can, even though they are in the same zone, still enable security profiles on this traffic. And I'll show you how to do that as well. The next one that we're going to create is going to be the DMZ zone. So this is going to be stuff that we want not to be able to communicate with each other for the most part. And which is going to be the DMZ shouldn't have to communicate with any other network. Neither should the voice, neither should the cameras, neither should guest, right? So none of these networks should need to communicate with each other. So we're going to leave block intrazone traffic on, and we're going to click OK. So we have our trusted LAN zone, we have our DMZ zone, and now we can create policies for these zones.